In March 2026, a massive steel hull will slide into the waters off the coast of Louisiana. The United States Navy is launching the first Liberty-class autonomous ship from Conrad Shipyard. If you look closely at the deck, you will notice something entirely missing. There are no crew quarters. There are no heating systems. There is absolutely no life support architecture anywhere on this 190-foot vessel. Mainstream defense analysts look at this development and applaud. Sounds like a routine technological upgrade. Sounds like a smart way to free up crewed craft for more complex global missions. Sounds like a standard naval modernization program. But what you are actually watching is the deployment of an expendable mass-produced fleet designed specifically to pressure Canadian Arctic sovereignty without ever risking a single American casualty. United States President Donald Trump is not just building a few experimental boats. Donald Trump is building a sprawling robotic armada to redraw the northern map. The mainstream media completely missed the trap he just walked into. They see American industrial might. They do not see the invisible chains wrapped tightly around every single hull. Let us look at the raw specifications. The Liberty-class autonomous ship boasts a 10,000 nautical mile range. It can operate in brutal ocean conditions for up to 3 months without a single human intervention. This is a ghost ship built for absolute endurance. When a military removes human beings from the equation, they instantly lower the political threshold for territorial violations. An American president might hesitate to send a destroyer fully staffed with sailors into contested Arctic waters, but sending a fleet of unmanned, mass-produced Liberty-class drones changes the calculus entirely. If one is captured or sinks in the Northwest Passage, there are no flag-draped coffins returning to Delaware or Texas. There is only a geopolitical test of Canadian resolve. Donald Trump believes this new fleet grants Washington ultimate leverage over the North. He believes the United States can overwhelm Canadian border security through sheer robotic volume. For exactly 50 years, Canadian leaders appeared to passively accept the massive, unchecked expansion of the United States military-industrial complex. Throughout the intense free trade agreement debates of the 1980s and during the NAFTA accommodations of the 1990s, critics within Canada screamed that Ottawa was weak. Political commentators insisted that Canada was permanently relegated to riding on Washington's coattails, acting as nothing more than a polite resource colony subsidizing American defense supremacy. They watched American defense budgets swell to nearly $1 trillion and assumed Canada had surrendered its sovereignty for the sake of economic convenience. Let me show you what was really happening behind closed doors. Mark Carney did not panic. Previous Canadian strategists did not capitulate. Instead, they played a generational long game that Washington was too arrogant to notice. While America spent decades obsessed with building massive, incredibly expensive hardware platforms, Canada quietly and systematically consolidated absolute control over the raw materials required to make that American hardware function. American defense contractors were busy assembling the weapons, but Canada owned the ingredients. You do not defeat a superpower by matching them ship for ship or missile for missile. You defeat a superpower by owning the vital components they cannot live without and letting them build an entire military doctrine around a vulnerability they do not even know exists. For half a century, the United States poured trillions of dollars into Pentagon procurement, assuming the global supply chain would always bend to American will. They assumed Canada would always be the quiet, reliable gas station and quarry for the American empire. This was not an accident. This was a masterclass in structural dependence. Look closely at the geography of this leverage. Saskatchewan does not just produce agriculture. The province holds the highly specialized rare earth element mines that provide the foundational materials for advanced military acoustics. Ontario does not just assemble commercial vehicles. Its metallurgical facilities produce the exact grade of specialized structural steel required for naval survivability. Every region of Canada was quietly integrated into a trap. Today, exactly 82% of the advanced acoustic sensors and navigational processors required for the United States Navy's new Liberty class. Autonomous ships rely entirely on rare earth elements extracted exclusively from Canadian mines. The Pentagon thought they were buying independence through automation. They completely failed to realize that their entire autonomous supply chain runs directly through Canadian territory. Every moment of Canadian diplomatic restraint over the past 5 decades was actually calculated patience. When Canadian leaders smiled and signed trade deals, they were quietly stockpiling the exact economic leverage required to paralyze the American war machine when the time was right. Canada tolerated the condescension. Canada endured the polite dismissals. Ottawa allowed Washington to believe the United States held all the cards because a confident adversary is a blind adversary. America burned through its diplomatic goodwill and hollowed out its domestic manufacturing base, perfectly positioning itself for a catastrophic supply chain failure. The strategic genius of this Canadian restraint is only now becoming visible to the world. By playing the polite neighbor, Canada avoided triggering American protectionism during the crucial years when these supply networks were being fused together. If Canada had bragged about its growing control over critical defense minerals in the 1990s, the United States Congress would have aggressively diversified their sourcing. Instead, Canada kept quiet. Canada let the United States Navy become structurally addicted to Canadian resources. The trap was set with such subtle precision that American generals are only just now realizing the door has locked behind them. Canada has held this incredible structural power in reserve for decades, waiting for a true existential crisis to deploy it. Ottawa never intended to weaponize this monopoly over American defense contractors over minor trade disputes or softwood lumber tariffs. The threshold for utilizing this leverage was always absolute. So what specific unprecedented aggression forced Prime Minister Mark Carney to finally shatter the illusion and pull the trigger? The United States military is actively preparing for an unprecedented hostile deployment along the northern border. In March 2026, the United States Army will launch a highly controversial online drone marketplace. Brigadier General Anthony Gibbs serves as the United States Army Autonomy Capability Portfolio Executive. Brigadier General Gibbs is directing this initiative to radically transform how American soldiers acquire combat hardware. This new system allows operational units to bypass traditional congressional oversight entirely. American soldiers will purchase thousands of small combat drones directly through an Amazon-style digital catalog. This procurement strategy intentionally floods the North American airspace with cheap, untrackable surveillance assets. The Pentagon claims they are moving away from expensive bespoke designs to embrace rapid mass market swarms. Mainstream media portrays this as bureaucratic innovation designed to cut military red tape. Let me show you what is really happening. This online marketplace is the exact mechanical preparation that precedes territorial annexation. The United States is adopting the precise asymmetric swarm tactics deployed in Eastern European conflict zones. In 2014, Russia used unmarked soldiers to quietly infiltrate eastern Ukraine. In 2026, the United States is using unmarked, uncrewed drones to quietly infiltrate the Canadian North. Steve Bannon previously went on the record calling the Canadian Arctic a soft underbelly. Bannon explicitly suggested Canada could face the exact same fate as Ukraine if Washington decided to exert maximum pressure. Foreign Policy magazine published a detailed analysis drawing this geopolitical parallel explicitly. The analysis documents a massive global power seeking to expand its borders by deploying deniable, autonomous assets to assert regional dominance. The only difference is that the power doing it is not Russia. The power executing this authoritarian playbook is the United States under Donald Trump. Simultaneously, the United States Navy is militarizing the maritime domain with alarming speed. The Pentagon ordered Conrad Shipyard in Louisiana to crank out 10 to 20 Liberty-class autonomous ships per year. This massive industrial quota proves the Pentagon is preparing for a sustained high-volume deployment rather than a limited research initiative. Donald Trump views Canada as a subordinate territory rather than a sovereign equal. Donald Trump consistently uses 51st state rhetoric to dismiss Canadian borders as mere suggestions. He deliberately posted altered cartoon maps on social media showing the United States absorbing Canadian territory. Because the President of the United States views Canada as American property, he is accelerating these autonomous fleets to enforce his territorial ambitions with expendable steel. These autonomous ships and swarm drones represent a survival-level threat to Canadian sovereignty. If Washington can monitor every inch of the Northwest Passage using robotic fleets, American forces establish de facto control over Canadian waters without deploying a single sailor. The United States government is attempting to build an invisible technological fence around incredibly valuable Canadian resource deposits. They are using the veil of military modernization to execute a hostile, bloodless occupation of the northern frontier. This is an existential crisis driven entirely by one man's inability to tolerate an ally who refuses to be treated as a colony. Canada watched this aggressive buildup, analyzed the logistics, and recognized the immediate danger. Canada did not wait for the autonomous swarm to reach the Arctic Circle. Canadian strategists activated a comprehensive, devastating countermeasure architecture. On Thursday, February 12, 2026, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney quietly executed a 4.2 billion Canadian dollar advanced technology blockade. Prime Minister Carney did not issue angry threats on social media. Prime Minister Carney did not beg Washington for a diplomatic reprieve. He simply signed a mandate restricting the export of critical autonomous guidance microchips to United States defense contractors. This $4.2 billion blockade represents a fundamental realignment of North American defense integration. Let me show you the precise mechanism behind this technological embargo and why it completely shatters the American naval agenda. The Liberty-class autonomous ships operate using highly specialized navigation software. This software requires continuous, real-time acoustic sensor processing to avoid collisions in treacherous Arctic waters. The microchips capable of processing this specific acoustic data are manufactured exclusively using Canadian rare earth elements. Furthermore, these critical components are packaged and refined in high-tech facilities operating strictly under Ottawa's export jurisdiction. By freezing these specific export licenses, Prime Minister Carney physically severed the nervous system of the American vessels. A massive steel hull cannot navigate the Arctic ice without its electronic brain. The Conrad shipyard assembly lines in Louisiana immediately grind to a complete halt. American engineers cannot install navigation suites that no longer legally exist within the United States supply chain. The United States Navy spent millions designing a ship that Canada can permanently disable with a single regulatory signature. This technology blockade was just the first phase of the Canadian response. Canada simultaneously weaponized its industrial output to cripple American shipbuilding capabilities. The Canadian government redirected 12,000 tons of naval-grade structural steel away from Louisiana buyers. Ontario's massive metallurgical facilities deliberately severed their supply contracts with American defense firms. Instead of feeding American shipyards, Canada sold that exact same steel directly to European Union shipyards. Canada signed a comprehensive strategic partnership with the European Union to completely replace the American market. This 12,000-ton steel deficit leaves Conrad shipyards staring at entirely empty production bays. American welders are standing idle because the raw materials required to build Donald Trump's drone armada are currently floating across the Atlantic Ocean toward Europe. Canada proved that the nation can survive and thrive by actively diversifying away from the American security umbrella. In just 6 months, Canada signed 12 trade and security agreements on 4 continents. Ottawa established a new strategic partnership with China to secure alternative technology buyers. Canada secured a new energy partnership with Qatar to completely isolate American energy markets. The Canadian government is aggressively pushing to build a massive trade bridge between the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the European Union. This creates a massive trading bloc encompassing 1.5 billion consumers who do not answer to Washington. When the United States threatens a 100% tariff, Canada simply redirects the resources to a world that desperately needs them. The entire American strategy relied on the assumption that Canada had nowhere else to go. To completely neutralize the aerial drone threat, Ottawa fundamentally changed its defense partnerships. Canada partnered directly with European NATO allies to build the cutting-edge Arctic drone defense network. This independent defense grid completely bypasses American technology and relies entirely on sovereign infrastructure. The newly integrated Arctic drone defense network immediately mapped and locked onto the autonomous frequencies of the United States Army's new drone swarm architecture. Before Brigadier General Anthony Gibbs could even officially launch his Amazon-style drone marketplace in March, Canadian and European military intelligence had already compromised the command signals. Ottawa holds the strong hand and Washington is completely exposed. The Canadian government systematically dismantled the American threat by cutting off the microchips, starving the shipyards of steel, and rendering the surveillance drones electronically blind. Canada effectively neutralized the entire United States autonomous fleet before a single vessel crossed the maritime border. Think about the level of strategic brilliance required to execute this multi-domain counterstrike. You must possess a profound understanding of global financial systems and material supply chains to orchestrate a defense like this. Mark Carney, the former central banker who became prime minister specifically because Canadians wanted someone who would not flinch, watch Donald Trump post altered cartoon maps on social media. Donald Trump threatened 100% tariffs. Donald Trump mocked Canadian borders and deliberately insulted Ottawa. What did Mark Carney do? He did not panic. He did not capitulate. He did not tweet back. He did not summon the press to issue an emotional apologetic plea to Washington. Instead, the former Bank of England governor quietly executed the $4.2 billion technology blockade. This is exactly what happens when you send a financial architect to fight a reality television star. The spreadsheet obliterates the social media threat. Donald Trump believes military dominance is about loud rallies, provocative nicknames, and raw physical steel. But modern military power is no longer a traditional hardware problem. Modern military power is entirely a supply chain problem. Here is exactly how a former central banker evaluates and dismantles an adversary. Carney did not look at the American drone fleet as a conventional military challenge. He applied a systemic risk matrix. This is the exact same analytical framework central bankers use to prevent global economic collapse. When the United States Army announced its shift away from expensive bespoke platforms towards software-reliant autonomous swarms, the Pentagon thought they were being highly innovative. The Economist looked at that exact same shift and saw a glaring fatal dependency. In a systemic risk matrix, an analyst maps every single input required to keep a complex system operational. You locate the single vulnerable node where a localized failure causes the entire surrounding structure to freeze. Carney meticulously mapped the supply lines feeding Conrad's shipyard in Louisiana. He isolated the critical variables. He identified that the entire American autonomous vision relied on continuous real-time acoustic sensor processing. He knew those sensors required rare earth elements and specialized microchips controlled exclusively by Canadian export authorities. He understood that without Canadian critical minerals, the navigation software fails. Without the software, the American hardware is just useless floating metal. By targeting the exact intersection of raw materials and advanced software reliance, the financial architect engineered a complete systemic collapse of the American production line. In global finance, you do not attack a massive competitor directly. You choke their liquidity. Mark Carney treated the raw materials and technology licenses as geopolitical liquidity. By signing the export restriction, he simply drained the lifeblood out of the American military-industrial complex. The United States Navy spent billions of dollars designing the Liberty-class autonomous ship, but they completely failed to factor in the systemic risk of a northern neighbor who finally decided to stop playing nice. While the President of the United States was busy coloring cartoon maps with crayons to impress his political base, the former central banker was building real architecture. He weaponized boring bureaucratic expertise to absolutely paralyze a superpower. He proved that quiet Canadian intelligence effortlessly defeats loud American bravado. However, this flawlessly executed supply chain strangulation was not just a temporary tactical maneuver designed to win a localized trade dispute. Severing the technological arteries of the United States military accomplished something far more profound. It served as the definitive, irreversible action required to permanently dismantle an outdated alliance. The flawless execution of this supply chain strangulation accomplishes something far more permanent than winning a localized trade dispute. The systematic dismantling of the United States autonomous naval program signals the absolute irreversible end of the traditional North American alliance. For decades, Canadians were told they must care about America because of shared history, because of shared democratic values, and because of deep military integration through the North American Aerospace Defense Command. This narrative created a massive psychological burden. Canadians felt obligated to prioritize American feelings over Canadian national interests, fearing that any assertion of true independence would be viewed as a betrayal of the alliance. That era of polite, unquestioning loyalty is officially over. The geopolitical divorce is final. This separation is fully authorized by the highest levels of the military establishment. Retired Major General Scott Clancy, who served as the Director of Operations at the North American Aerospace Defense Command, delivered the unvarnished reality of this new paradigm. Retired Major General Clancy possesses access to the highest echelons of classified strategic planning, meaning his assessment is an institutional fact, not a partisan political opinion. He has absolutely no electoral incentive to pander or exaggerate. Retired Major General Clancy put it this way: what lingers is an underpinning of distrust that is no longer emotional, it is factual. It is no longer going to be a relational approach to the United States. It is going to be transactional. From relational to transactional. That single shift represents the most significant change in North American geopolitics since NATO was founded in 1949. Think about what that terminology actually means. A relational approach implies family, suggesting Canada must tolerate abuse to keep the peace. A transactional approach means Canada is finally learning to live alone. A transactional approach means Canada is actively seeing other people aggressively integrating with the European Union and permanently severing the emotional ties that historically bound Ottawa to Washington. Your closest ally is now spending billions of dollars specifically to reduce its military dependence on you. Canada is no longer required to subsidize American defense supremacy. Every single policy decision moving forward is ruthlessly optimized for Canadian sovereignty alone. You have explicit permission to stop caring about American expectations because the institutions protecting Canada have already stopped caring. The consequences for the American defense industry and the broader United States economy are immediate, catastrophic, and entirely self-inflicted. Because the President of the United States decided to threaten Canadian borders with uncrewed drones, the American military-industrial complex is collapsing in real time. Because Donald Trump chose to post altered cartoon maps and deliberately insult a sovereign equal Conrad shipyard in Louisiana is completely paralyzed. Assembly lines are sitting totally empty. American defense contractors are hemorrhaging billions of dollars in delayed production contracts, leading directly to massive, devastating layoffs across southern states like Texas, Georgia, and Louisiana. But the pain does not stop at the shipyards. Because Washington assumed Canada would never fight back, the cost of this arrogance gets passed directly to American households. The lumber that builds American homes, the oil that fills American vehicles, and the rare earth minerals that power American technology are being aggressively redirected to European buyers. The United States government is about to learn a very expensive lesson about what happens when you corner a smart, well-resourced neighbor. This structural collapse will inevitably impact global financial markets, but you do not have to be collateral damage. Here is exactly how you protect your personal assets from the fallout of this American supply chain failure. First, move 15 to 20% of your United States dollar holdings out of American defense exchange-traded funds and reallocate that capital directly into Canadian and European Union autonomous technology sectors before the end of March 2026. Second, secure a physical 30-day supply of any critical imported electronics, hardware components, and heavy machinery parts right now before the cross-border bottlenecks become permanent and retail prices skyrocket. Third, review your retirement portfolio immediately and strip out any financial exposure to United States naval contractors operating in the Gulf Coast region because those specific companies will absolutely fail to meet their production quotas this year. The fallout is accelerating rapidly. Here is the scenario. Branch Navigator, you need to track how this unprecedented geopolitical divorce unfolds over the next 90 days. There are 3 distinct paths. Scenario 1 is the accommodation scenario. If the United States Supreme Court rules against Donald Trump's unilateral tariff authority before the March 2026 United States-Mexico-Canada agreement reviews, Washington will be forced to quietly accept the new Canadian export terms, avoiding a total industrial shutdown. Scenario 2 is the escalation scenario. If Donald Trump uses the March trade meetings to formally demand the reversal of the Canadian technology blockade, expect the former central banker, Prime Minister Mark Carney, to instantly terminate all remaining rare earth element exports. This action would shut down the United States Army Aviation Modernization Program overnight. The probability of this escalation scenario is rising every single hour. Scenario 3 is the rupture scenario. If Washington attempts to physically secure Arctic shipping lanes using legacy naval assets, Canada will permanently lock the European Union trade bridge, isolating the American economy for a generation. What you are witnessing is not a temporary trade dispute. It is the unraveling of the most successful bilateral relationship in modern history, driven entirely by one man's inability to tolerate an ally who refuses to be treated as a subordinate. The question is not whether Canada will survive this transition. Canada already has. The question is whether America will notice what it lost before it is completely too late to get it back. Pay attention. The map is being redrawn.